We're in the Minor Prophets. This morning we're looking at Obadiah. And we're going to have to hurry to get through the entire book. You're paying attention. If you doubt in any way, shape, or form that God is still at work in nations, this book is one of those that will help you to see He's still working. I know this was 2,000 years ago, actually about 2,600 years ago, but God is still working, and God's teaching us a principle here in Obadiah that if you do wrong, He will take it into account. If you do right, He'll take it into account. That's what heaven's all about. That's what Jesus is all about. But He wants us to understand that either in this life or in the one to come, wrong will be dealt with in one way or another. We're looking at the Edomites in Obadiah. This was God's prophecy through him against Edom. And before we read Obadiah, I'm going to need 4 readers in a minute, so just be thinking about that. I want you to go back to Genesis chapter 12 and kind of get a jumping off point for this. And what we're reading here in Genesis 12 is going to be true for Israel, but in a very real way, it's actually true for every nation when someone tries to do that nation harm, and even on an individual level, but especially for Israel. Genesis chapter 12, verse 1. The Lord said to Abram, "Go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." This is God's call to Abraham, and He makes some promises to him. But one of the things He says is, those who bless you, I'm going to bless, and those who curse you, I'm going to curse. I don't know that blessing and that curse, that principle, has been done away with in the mind of God. It's still at work, or it was still at work definitely with regard to Edom and Israel, and that's what we'll find out as we read this today. Let's go ahead and read Edom. I need a reader for verses 1 through 6. Who's got 1 through 6? All right, Bonnie. And then Janie, I'll give you 7 to 11. That's an easy one to remember, 7, 11. And then 12 to 16. Who's got 12 to 16? All right, Shannon. And 17 to 21. Who wants to finish up Obadiah reading 17 to 21? Danae. Good. All right. Let's go.
Obadiah. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a report from the Lord. A messenger has been sent among the nations. Rise up, let us rise against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rock, in your lofty dwelling, who say in your heart, who will bring you down to the ground? Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. If thieves came to you, if plunderers came by night, how have you been destroyed? Would they not steal only enough for themselves? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleaning? How Esau has been pillaged, his treasure is all out.
All your allies have driven you to your border. Those who peace with you have besieged you. They have prevailed against you. Those who eat your bread have turned against you. You have no understanding. Will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy the wise men out of Edom, and understanding out of Mount Esau? And your mighty men shall be dismayed, O Timon, so that every man from Mount Esau will be cut off by the slaughter. Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. On that day that you stood aloft, on that day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates, and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them.
You should not look down on your brother in the day of his misfortune, nor rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor boast too much in the day of their trouble. You should not march through the gates of my people in the day of their disaster, nor look down on them in their calamity. calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives, nor hand over their survivors in the day of their trouble. The day of the Lord is near for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your head, upon your own head. Just as you drank on my holy hill, so all the nations will drink continually, and they will drink and be as if they had never been.
But on Mount Zion there will be those who escape, and it will be holy. And the house of Jacob will possess their possessions. Then the house of Jacob will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau will be as stubble, and they will set them on fire and consume them, so that there will be no survivor of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. Then those of the Negev will possess the mountain of Esau, and those of the Shephelah, the Philistine plain, also possess the territory of Ephraim and the territory of Samaria. And Benjamin will possess Gilead. And the exiles of this host of the sons of Israel, who are among the Canaanites, as far as Zareph, and the exiles of Jerusalem, who are in Sephard, will possess the cities of the Negev. The deliverers will ascend Mount Zion to judge the mountain of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's.
Well done. Thank you all. Whose name keeps coming up in this prophecy? What individual's name? Esau. Why Esau? What's that? All right, Esau sold his birthright, but the Edomites, on whom this prophecy comes, are his descendants. They are the descendants of Esau. And what we're seeing here is a tiff between the Edomites and Israel that's been long in existence. So let's go back again to Genesis, but this time let's go back to chapter 26. 25, end of 25. At the end of chapter 25 of Genesis, we read about Jacob and Esau being born. They were twins. Who is the oldest of the two? Esau was the oldest. What happened when they were being born? You can read about it here, but I'm just asking to see if everybody's familiar with this. Esau comes out first, and then what happens? Jacob grabs hold of Esau's heel. That's how come he gets this name supplanter, because he's grabbing the heel of his brother who came out first. And so when we get down to chapter 25 and verse 27 of Genesis, this is what we read. When the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the field, but Jacob was a peaceful man, living in tents. Now Isaac loved Esau because he had a taste for game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Now here's a story about having favorites in the family and maybe what comes of it. Boy, you could really build something out of that, couldn't you? When Jacob had cooked stew, Esau came in from the field and he was famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Please let me have a swallow of that red stuff there, for I'm famished." Therefore his name was called Edom. So why was it called Edom? Because Edom means red. That's how he got that nickname or name. It's not a nickname, that's his name. Became his name. Jacob said, "First, sell me your birthright. You want a bowl of this stew? You better sell me your birthright." Man, he's a pretty hard dealer, isn't he? Esau said, "Behold, I'm about to die. So of what use then is the birthright to me?" Do you really think he was going to die if he didn't get that bowl of stew? I sort of doubt it. So he gives up his birthright. What will God say about this later regarding Esau and his birthright? God will say that Esau despised his birthright. This was his behavior, and his behavior showed his despite towards his birth. It was an honor to have that birthright, but he didn't keep it as an honor. So this is what happens. This is how it starts. Jacob getting Esau's birthright, and it didn't come about until a little bit later in chapter 27 that we see Jacob actually getting the birthright. Came about as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob. Jacob had fooled Isaac into blessing. Do you remember that? Isaac's eyes had gotten dim. And so Esau went out into the field. He was going to kill something and bring it back and make savory food for his dad. But while he was out there, since Rebekah loved Jacob more, she had him go kill a goat, and she made the same kind of savory stuff out of that goat that Esau would have made with the venison or whatever it was that he got, fed that to Isaac, and Isaac, being blind, thought, well, this must be Esau, and so he blessed Jacob with Esau's blessing. This is what it says. Well, where is it? 47? 27. Oh, yeah, there you go. So he came close and kissed him, and when he'd smelled the smell of his garments, he blessed him and said, see, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Now may God give you the dew of heaven and the fatness of the earth and an abundance of grain and new wine. May people serve you and nations bow down to you. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you. Isn't that interesting? This same idea of blessing and cursing, those who bless and curse, is carried in with this blessing. So then Esau comes in and he finds out that Jacob has stolen a blessing, and it's like, well, duh, you sold it to him for a bowl of beans, you goober. What's wrong with you? You should, yeah, Dad, that was right. You're supposed to give him the blessing. Well, so down here in verse 39, Isaac gives Esau the leftover blessing, more or less. He says, behold, away from the fertility of the earth shall be your dwelling. Man, what kind of a blessing is that? And away from the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and your brother you shall serve. But it shall come about, when you become restless, that you will break the yoke from your neck. There's not a whole lot in Scripture said about these blessings, but I believe these come more from God than from the fathers who give them. This was during the days of the patriarchs, and God worked through the patriarchs. And so these blessings were a big deal. It wasn't just something that a dad would say, well, this is what I hope for you, or this is what I want for you. This was something that when it's recorded in Scripture like this, when God gives us the record of it, he also shows us how these blessings come to pass. And so this is what we've got between Jacob and Esau. And this continues centuries later. Look at Psalm 83. Psalm 83, this is a psalm of Asaph. He was a lyricist, I guess you'd call him. And this is Asaph calling on God to deal with Israel's enemies. And so he says this, verse 1, God, do not remain quiet, do not be silent, O God, and do not be still, for behold, your enemies, not just our enemy, but your enemies make an uproar, and those who hate you exalted themselves. They made shrewd plans against your people and conspired together against your treasured ones. They have said, come and let us wipe them out as a nation, that the name of Israel be remembered no more. Are we hearing that refrain any more today on the planet? Duh, of course we are. The Arab nations have sworn to wipe out Israel. They are their hated enemy. Somebody well said, if the Arab nations laid down their arms against Israel, there would be peace. If Israel laid down their arms against the Arabs, there would be no Israel. If you look at the recent history, not just long past history, but if you look at recent history, you can see how that's true. But he goes on to say, for they have conspired together with one mind. Against you they make a covenant. The tents of Edom and the Ishmaelites. Who are the Ishmaelites? Where'd they come from? Isaac was the promised son between Abraham and Sarah. So where'd Ishmael come from? Was Ishmael Abraham's son? Yes, but he wasn't Sarah's son. He was Hagar's son. God promised Abraham and Sarah, you're going to have a son. I'm promising you a son. And after a while, they got kind of restless and said, we haven't had this son. It's been, 14 years? And they hadn't had the son. And so Sarah says, well, how about you take Hagar? I don't know what Sarah's thinking. And she's got to be thinking, I'm not getting any younger. God promised us when I was 74. Wow. And I don't know, even for Bible ages, that's getting up there for having children. So 14 years goes by, and Nothing's happened. So she said, well, take Hagar and have a son by him. That child was Ishmael. That wasn't the promised child. And between the Ishmaelites and the Israelites, by the way, the Arabs, they are the descendants of Ishmael. Now this, I'm not trying to state some kind of a racist thing against anybody. I'm just saying this is history. This is history. This is written into the book. And we got to ask ourselves, if this was God's prophecy through Obadiah against Edom, why does he have it written down and preserved for us to read today? What's the whole point? Do we need to know what's in Obadiah to be saved through Jesus Christ? I would say no, but it's in here for a reason. God doesn't play around. He didn't just take up space. Oh, I need a couple extra pages in the Bible. Well, actually, I just need one extra page. I'll just put Obadiah in there. No. It's got to be a reason. It doesn't. Yes, that's what the whole law was. That's the purpose of the law, to bring us to Christ. So this is part of that, to bring us to Christ. There's an understanding here that we need to gain, we need to have. And there's a lot here to be had. I would tell you what it is, except it's not stated what it is. We got to figure that out. I'll figure out what I think it is. You figure out what you think it is. Make some notes and give them to me, will you? But this is a psalm bearing out this idea of this animosity between Edom and Israel. And then Isaiah 63. This is a prophecy from Isaiah. Pretty, what's the word for this? Pretty energetic, perhaps is a word to use. Isaiah 63:1. Who is this who comes from Edom with garments of glowing colors from Bozrah? That was one of the major cities of Edom. This one who is majestic in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. It is I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your apparel red, and your garments like the one who treads the winepress? I have trodden the wine trough alone, and from the peoples there was no man with me. I also trod them in my anger and trampled them in my blood. Wait a minute, where's he coming from? Where's he been? He's been in Edom. He's coming from Edom. And somebody sees him coming. This is God coming from Edom. Sees him coming from Edom and says, well, why are your garments all red? He says, I've been trodden the winepress. I trod them in my anger, trampled them in my wrath, and their lifeblood is sprinkled on my garments, and I stained all my raiment. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and my year of redemption has come. I looked, and there was no one to help, and I was astonished that there was no one to uphold. So my own arm brought salvation to me, and my wrath upheld me. I trod down the peoples in my anger and made them drunk in my wrath, and I poured out their lifeblood on the earth. Wow. I think he was upset with Edom. Why? What did Obadiah say that the Edomites had done? The date that's given for Obadiah is 585 BC. Does that date mean anything to us? It should. It was in 606 that Nebuchadnezzar came the first time, and he took several Israelites away. That was the first deportation. He came back in 586 and took another bunch of Israelites away, and he would come one more time. But after this second deportation is when Obadiah is dated, because apparently what was happening was Israelites were trying to flee from Nebuchadnezzar and his armies, trying to flee from the captivity that was looming ahead of them. And the Edomites were waiting around to find these Israelites who were escaping. Some of them they would kill. Some of them they would take into slavery. Some of them they would sell back into slavery to the Babylonians. And God says, what are you doing? These are my people. You know this. They're being oppressed, and you're taking advantage of the situation, and you're oppressing them as well as the Babylonians are. If the Edomites had taken God seriously on his promise to Abraham, they would have said, let's bless these people, and God will bless us. But instead, these stinking Israelites These no good Jews. Let's sell them back to the Babylonians or let's kill them ourselves, whichever way it comes. And God says, all right, I made a promise. I'm going to keep that promise. I'm going to curse those who curse Abraham and his offspring, and that's what he's doing in Israel. There was something else I wanted to say from this. Oh, the astonishment. Do you think God's ever astonished? Do you think God ever goes, oh, I can't believe that happened. I can't believe you did that. He ought to be, yeah. So I don't think he's astonished. I really can't see that with God, who knows everything and who lives outside of time. But why would Isaiah record that God is astonished? And what was he astonished about? No one helped. That's what he was astonished about. It's as if, I used to hate it when my mom would say this to me. Marty Kessler, actually it was Marty Joe Kessler, because I was in trouble every time she said this. Don't you know better? Don't you know better? And I think that's what's going on here with God. God's not, I don't believe he's actually astonished, but he's using this, and I think it's just like Colleen just said. You should have been aware of this, and I'm throwing this idea of astonishment out there so you'll get the idea that you really should have known better, and anybody who doesn't know what you should have known ought to be astonished about that. How could you not know? How could you not understand? How could you not understand that taking a rifle into a Walmart and killing 20 people is insanity? And it's cowardly. Now, if you want to do something crazy but not cowardly, go out to the Army firing range or the Marine firing range where they've got live ammo and start shooting at those guys. See what happens. But a Walmart? Families in there? What does our country come to? And I'm not saying our country in the sense that we're all responsible for what this guy did. There was a lot of people who would say, oh yeah, it's my fault. My fault as American that this guy went in there. No. It's his fault for being evil. What he did was evil. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. If somebody supports that, well then okay, then you might be a part of that. And I can see God still today putting this idea out of astonishment. Are you not astonished that nobody took this in hand? You see the way people are saying and what they're teaching and the influences that are being had, especially over our young people, and God has not yet come in judgment? Got to make us wonder. This is what he did with Edom. What's he going to do with us? Amos, remember Amos? We were just there a couple weeks ago. Amos had a pronunciation against Edom. Amos chapter 1, verse 11. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4 I will not revoke its punishment, because he pursued his brother with the sword, while he stifled his compassion. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but you probably remember if you've ever stifled your compassion. There was something in you saying, have compassion, and you didn't have compassion. The Greek word, it's interesting, I know this is Old Testament and it's Hebrew, but the Greek word for compassion is splanknon. Isn't that a great word? The word splanknon actually means your spleen. That's where we get the word spleen, your bowels, what's down deep inside of you. And somehow, some way, that seems to be where compassion comes from. Where does math come from when you're doing math? It doesn't come from down here. If you're not good at it, you might get sick down here trying to do math. But we think of math being done in our head. Oh, we look up because, we're trying to get up to the top of the brain. That's where all the smarts are, if you got any. But spleen, the spleen, that's way down deep. And that's where we sense compassion coming from. There's something down deep inside of us. And God is saying there was something down deep inside of you that was compelling you to have compassion, to care about people, to do good, to do right, to help. And you stifled that. You wouldn't allow that to carry you in the direction you didn't intellectually want to go. You had a desire to do evil, and that's what you did. So I will send fire upon Teman, and it will consume the citadels of Bozrah. You remember Bozrah? We read that in Isaiah, major city of the Edomites. So this is God, a single chapter. And remember, when God gave the prophets and the New Testament writers what they had to write down, it wasn't divided up into chapters and verses. But there's just enough of Obadiah that it can be easily corralled in a single chapter. And so that's what we've got here. It's just one message, but it's very pointed, and it's easy to understand who it's against and why. Malachi. We're not over. We're not done. This idea of Jacob and Esau is carried on to Malachi. How far behind Jesus is Malachi age-wise? We're talking about 400 years prior to Jesus coming in the flesh. That's when Malachi spoke, so we're running it up this far. Malachi chapter 1, verse 1, the oracle of the word of the Lord to Israel through Malachi. I have loved you, says the Lord, but you say, how have you loved us? Was not Esau, and here's the answer to that question, was not Esau Jacob's brother, declares the Lord? Yet I have loved Jacob, but I have hated Esau. And I have made his mountains a desolation and appointed his inheritance for the jackals of the wilderness. Though Edom says, we have been beaten down, but we will return and build up the ruins. Thus says the Lord of hosts, they may build, but I will tear down. And men will call them the wicked territory and the people toward whom the Lord is indignant forever. Your eyes will see this, and you will say, the Lord be magnified beyond the border of Israel. What's that mean, the Lord be magnified beyond the borders of Israel? With idol gods, idols were generally seen as having a power that was local. If you live in the mountains, there's a god of the mountains. If you live in the valley, there's a god of the valley. If you live down by the sea, there's gods of the sea. And that's how gods were seen to be. The true and living God's not like that. He spoke the universe into existence. And while he is outside the universe, he's also inside the universe. There's no place you can be where he is not. There's no thought you can think that he doesn't completely understand, which is a great comfort to me, that he understands me. Is that not a comfort to you? Marty, you're a goober. What's that? Yes. Yeah, that he understands me. And if you think of that, I'm sure it'll be a great comfort to you, because I do goofy things. I say things I know better than to say that or to do that, and I know I should have done this, but I didn't do that. I did this instead because I don't. And God, I know. I've watched you live for 62 years, Marty. You're a goofy guy, but I love you. Isn't that what our parents say to us? Probably. Yeah. Don't you have a pet, or haven't you ever had a pet that was just a worthless? Never mowed the grass, never washed dishes, made messes everywhere. You had to feed it, you had to take it to the vet. Oh, man. But why did you have a pet? No, I'm not trying to say we're God's pets. That's not the illustration here at all. But I'm saying our capacity to love is huge, because God's is huge, and his desire is to love and have relationship with the living beings that he has made. That's what he wants. That's what he wants more than anything. That's why he gave his son for that. But when people go against that, and when people fight against, which is what Esau was doing, and fighting against the very people through whom God would bring this blessing into the world, God says, I'm stopping you in your tracks, buddy. Bud?
I was going to say that teaching responsibility to children, we understand. teaching responsibility to adults is something else.
Mm.
So, but that's what God has to do before Christ came anyway. He had to draw their attention to their responsibility that they have. And sometimes we don't want responsibility. You go to a psychiatrist or anybody that deals with helping people to have a better mind, okay? You find that they begin by asking, how much responsibility are you willing to accept? And so sometimes we just don't want to accept any responsibility from God. And God says, this is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to try, or at least strive towards. You know, you don't have to be perfect, but I want you to try, at least try.
Right.
And we think about that with our own children. We know they're not, and we know they're not going to be perfect. We know that they're not going to do this perfectly. But if we judge them by the level of their wanting to do it, wanting to please God, and that's what most of this is all about. It's teaching people that God is God. God created them, and that they need to at least try hard as they can.
Right.
You know,
And take responsibility for that.
that's right. They take the responsibility.
I'm glad you brought this up. I've observed this. I think it's true. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on any particular generation. I know we tend to do that. Oh, the Generation X or the Generation Y or the whatever generation. But my parents grew up during the Great Depression. That shaped the way people thought and behaved. It shaped their value system. After the Great Depression came World War II. And they lived through World War II. You could say mom fought on the home front and dad fought overseas. They weren't married at the time, but that's just the way it was. People who lived in this country, you didn't know if we were going to win or not. We've never been in a war for the last many decades, since World War II, where we were worried about our country being taken over. But that was the reality in World War II. And so people lived through that. And all of that shaped the way they thought. It shaped their values. So they grew up in times when they just hardly didn't have anything. They went through World War II where they thought what they had they might lose. And then finally the war was over. Prosperity came to America. All these guys came back on the GI Bill, got educations, and factories were built. And we just had a uproarious time. And then parents started to think, well, I've got kids now. I don't want my kids to be depraved like they were when I was a kid. I'm going to give them a bunch of stuff. And you start raising a generation that just doesn't have the basis for the same appreciation for life and values that the previous generation had. The only way to fix that is to keep trying to instill that. But you can only instill so much intellectually. Some things just have to be learned by experience. And so we come into the 60s, the wonderful 60s. Do you remember the 60s? LSD, Woodstock, Vietnam, the race riots. There was so much confusion in the 60s, and you started to see and hear all this stuff, and you heard voices that were contradicting one another, and we no longer had this unified idea of we're Americans, we're proud of the flag. You saw people burning the flag, stepping on the flag, and everything was starting to change. 70s and 80s, things calmed down a little bit, but the seed was sown that we didn't get here through God, we got here through evolution. And now if you don't believe in evolution, you're just an idiot because evolution is science. And so now you Christians are stupid. And that, most of you are old enough to remember, yeah, this is the way it was. And it remains this way to a great extent. And you remember when you could send your kids off to public school and you didn't have to worry for the most part what they're being taught except for the evolution thing. But when I went to school, I was a kid. Every morning, we'd go in, we'd stand up, we'd say the Pledge of Allegiance, we would sing at least 2 patriotic songs, God Bless America or America the Beautiful or something like that. Then we go into our studies, and there was order in the classroom. You didn't get out of line because Mrs. Woofter or whoever else was the teacher that day would paddle your rear till it hurt, and it wasn't some little swat. I mean, you could hear it when you're in the classroom. They're out in the hall with bam, 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 bam. Oh, that put the fear of the Lord in you. Yeah. Now, this is the 60s, too. And then when your parents found out, you got another one. Who do you think you are behaving in school like that and bringing a bad name on our family? Arr, 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 arr.
If your dad had to leave the field, come and get you at school.
Oh.
Pray that he didn't stop between the school and the house, because if he stopped.
Yeah, it's just over. I'm surprised some of us made it out alive. But that taught us something. That taught us something because we knew there's a lot of good in life, but there's also a lot of evil, and you need to learn to choose. You need to learn to choose the evil, and the old King James word, eschew the bad. That's a good word, eschew. There's some words I don't use very often. That's one of them, but it's a good word. You put that away from you. Today, people don't even know what gender they want their kids to be. I'm not even going to call them a boy or a girl until they get to be 3 or 6 years. Well, they're 6 years old. They ought to know what their gender is. See, it's not sex anymore. It's gender. You think I'm kidding? What sex is your baby? Well, it's going to be a male, but we're not sure about the gender. And there's a part of me that just wants to take a big stick and start hitting people. Because, you know, this idea of beating the stupidity out of somebody that our parents had back in the day, that's not always a bad idea. I'm not saying any of us as Christians should do this, but I'm saying somewhere along the way, this is what it comes down to in Obadiah. Nobody taught the Edomites somewhere along the way, you better stop what you're doing. You better pay attention to what God said. You better honor Israel. Even if you don't like him, you better honor him as God's people. Because that's what God said to do. And back in that day, that was the thing you better had paid attention to. And if you didn't pay attention to that, you were going to get your comeuppance, and God was going to make sure. Even if God would say, I'm amazed that nobody else is taking this in hand. Because everybody ought to know this is the way it is, but nobody's taking this in hand, so I'm going to take it in hand. That's why he was seen coming from Edom with his garments stained in blood. Because it wasn't, I'm going to go down there and spank some people. I'm going to go down there and I'm going to wipe some people out.
On the first of this, he spoke about us not rejoicing in their calamity, not
Yes.
taking advantage of their calamity.
Right.
And those type of things, which we jump on the bandwagon when our enemy falls, and we rejoice in it. He says not to do that.
Right.
And they did. And then he talks about, if you bless my people, I will bless you. He cursed. All of these things are for us to rise above our base instinct.
Absolutely.
And the love of God is above a base instinct. We either like or dislike. Well, this is rising above that base instinct to do the right thing.
That's right.
Even though we want to kick them in the kneecaps when they're down because we're so thrilled,
Exactly.
we're not supposed to do that.
Just like Jesus in the garden. Peter cuts off Malchus's ear. Jesus could have said, yeah, you deserve that, you stinking no, well, whatever he could have said. But what's he do? He heals his ear. He says, Peter, put your sword away. And then he heals Malchus. Malchus has come out with the other group to arrest him and take it off to be beaten and crucified and abused. That's what Jesus does. Look at Proverbs just for a second here. Proverbs chapter 24. I thought you were going to quote this while you were making your comments. Proverbs 24, 17 and 18. Do not rejoice when your enemy falls, and do not let your heart be glad when he stumbles. The Lord will see it and be displeased, and turn his anger away from him. Now, there's something interesting in this passage, if you think about it. Do not let your heart be glad. What does that imply? Your heart wants to be glad. He's getting his. It's like when one of your brothers or sisters was getting a spanking, and you thought, yeah. Better not have that spirit, God says. Don't rejoice when your enemy falls. Do not let your heart be glad. Your heart wants to be glad, but he says, nope, refrain and restrain. Hold yourself back. Do not allow yourself to be glad when your enemy stumbles. What did Jesus say on the cross? Of the 7 things he said, what's the one that just seems to stand out? Father, forgive them. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And somebody made this observation, and I really think it's an excellent observation. The one thief who came to faith on the cross. Why did he come to faith on the cross? And I'm wondering, as this guy wondered and asked the question years ago, and I heard, that's a good question. Did he come to faith on the cross because he saw how Jesus died and saw how different his spirit was than the spirits of others? Can you imagine all these people giving you all this pain? What would your response be as a human being? Would you plead for mercy? Jesus never pled for mercy. Would you curse those who were hurting you? Jesus never cursed those who were hurting you. We don't have any idea how we would respond because we've not been in that situation, but I know in one way or another we've probably all done both of those at some way in our course of life. John?
They know what they do. I mean, for somebody to respond that way, that makes you stand apart from everybody else around.
Right. And his spirit was that throughout the whole process. He had what? Okay. Right. Now here's another thing about that. Did God have to have that recorded for us today? That request Jesus was making, Father, forgive them, was for those guys. But God, through the Holy Spirit, had that written down for us. So today, 2,000 years later, I read that and I go, wow. 3,000 years later, I read what Solomon said about don't rejoice when your enemy falls. Now, there's a sense of justice that we have that is good. When justice is done, be glad justice is done. But when it comes down to the individual, we need to refrain from allowing our heart to hate and allowing our heart to be glad when people suffer, even if they deserve it. Because when it comes right down to it, we deserve it too. We deserve to suffer. Oh well, there's Obadiah. I hope you consider it covered. We talked about a lot of things leading up to it, but that's it. Observations, questions as we close? What's that?
Pain.
Pain.
Best teacher,
It gets your attention, doesn't it?
and you cannot pass it on from one generation to the next.
You can try. Yeah, but that's true.
The depression is lost upon me.
Right.
I have no idea.
And if you can't give your experience to somebody else. You can teach and train, you can try to intellectually inform, but you just can't pass on your experience to somebody else. Wouldn't that be great? If my grandparents could have bottled what they had growing up and passed it on, and I could, let me take a drink of that. Oh, yeah, I see the world in a better light now. Oh, well, can't do it. We got to do that on our own. That's why we're here this morning, isn't it? All right. Lord bless you. Thank you for being here.